Star Wars is a transmedia franchise phenomenon, and dominates just about every form of media or merchandise it touches, whether it be films, television, comic books, games, lunchboxes, or oranges? One of the strangest successes to come out of the Star Wars brand is surely the LEGO Star Wars series of video games, based on both the highly successful movie franchise and its subsequent toy line first launched in 1999. 2005's LEGO Star Wars the video game recreated the events of episodes 1 to 3 in a cooperative slapstick fashion. By all accounts it shouldn't have worked, but the fun gameplay and highly addictive array of unlockables kept gamers coming back for more, and it launched not only a similarly well received sequel in LEGO Star Wars 2, the original trilogy, but a myriad of other LEGO inspired titles: Indiana Jones, Batman, Harry Potter, Jurassic Park, Marvel, and many more that are still being developed and released to strong sales today. But what is really interesting about LEGO Star Wars, in both the original game and its subsequent installments, is what it can tell us about simulative and participatory narrative modes, the concept of ludonarrative dissonance in video games, and the notion of an essential essence that is present in every text. By transcoding the Star Wars canon into the medium of the video game, it transcends fan criticism and supersedes adaptation theory's biggest hang-up: fidelity. Before we examine the game, let's first outline both ludonarrative dissonance and the concept of fidelity in adaptation. This term, ludonarrative dissonance, was first coined by game developer Clint Hocking in his blog post on the 7th of October 2007, entitled Ludonarrative Dissonance in BioShock. What is interesting from the very start is that Hocking calls the game in question, BioShock, great, and notes that, in a very important sense, BioShock lives up to the expectations created by its ancestor, System Shock, by inviting us to ask important and compelling questions, which is wonderful. However, Hocking believes that this game suffers from a powerful dissonance between what it is about as a game and what it is about as a story. He explains that a video game will offer the player two contracts that they must buy into in order to play the game once it begins: a ludic contract, ludus meaning gameplay, and a narrative contract, that being the narrative that is told across the levels within the game. In the particular case of BioShock, he notes how the ludic elements of the game are focused on the theme of Randian objectivism, whereby looking after and enriching your own life takes precedence before helping others. But the narrative contract in BioShock asks the player to help others, listening to and helping a man called Atlas by carrying out his every request, which often conflicts with the player's own self-interest. Hocking notes that the gameplay gives you the crucial ability to choose whether or not to help yourself or the other player characters you meet in the game, these characters being called the Little Sisters. But the narrative offers no alternative than to put Atlas's goals ahead of your own in order to progress. Hocking shows through BioShock that the logic of what makes the gameplay work as a system by which the player is challenged to win to progress, and the story by which the player is shown events to generate an emotional response, do not work in tandem with each other and contradict the theme these elements uphold. I actually think whether or not BioShock in particular is dissonant is open to debate, largely due to some narrative reveals in the game later down the line, but that's neither here nor there for this essay, and I don't want to detract from Hocking's main point, which absolutely is true for many video games across the last 10 years. I think the key word he uses in his post is that ludonarrative dissonance makes a game feel deceptive. As games have evolved to become infinitely more complex, with higher graphical qualities and mechanics, developers have had more room to tell stories with characters that can talk more and express feelings more coherently, and thus we have enjoyed more fleshed out narratives than just save the princess. But ludonarrative dissonance shows us that the gameplay hasn't quite caught up yet. An oft-used example for the current generation of gaming is the Uncharted series of video games. This series is famous for giving the player control of Nathan Drake, the ultimate blue-collar everyman, who cracks wise, gets into intense adventures, and consistently points out just how terrified he is so that the audience knows he's just like us.
Be careful.
Come on. I always am. Ah! I did not see that!
But we of course only glean all this from the narrative that Uncharted presents to us. The gameplay paints a wholly different tale. Nathan Drake, the elite killing machine, capable of taking on hordes of men with his bare fists effortlessly, handling an array of military-grade weaponry, and being nigh invulnerable. The ludic element tells us one thing about Nathan, and the narrative another. These two halves present facts to the player that are in stark contradiction of one another, yet constantly exist in the same space. thus shattering the internal consistency of the work, as Hocking pointed out. Not only is this a good example of what Hocking coined in his post, it shows that ludonarrative dissonance will only grow more prevalent as the capabilities of video games become more and more complex, and the narratives told within them evolve past the point of the simple win-lose mechanic video games present to the player. The relationship between video games and narrative is often thought to be an arduous one. Game stories are often criticised for being lesser than. Theorist Mark J.P. Wolf notes that video game narratives are often a far cry from the complex and detailed narratives found in other media. Perhaps this is snobbery incarnate, but there is a point to be made here. Conflict and character in gaming are so unlike any other medium. In a book, film, or even a radio play, the audience relishes experiencing the protagonist being put into the most challenging scenarios possible. We willingly allow the story to pull us on its preordained twists and turns. We might wince, cheer, or cry, but we know that our reactions will do nothing to stop the runaway freight train that is a mimetic narrative. Assuming the narrative is satisfactory and fulfills the promise of its premise, it doesn't matter how terrible things might get for the protagonist, because it's all in purpose of telling a great story. Whereas a video game must strike a perfect balance of challenge. As Jasmina Calais points out, a video game must be neither too hard, which leads to anxiety, nor too easy, which leads to boredom. Because being too easy would lead to disengagement, and being too challenging would lead to anger, which would lead to hate, which would lead to
suffering.
If this happens, the video game has failed the player. We will find that even with well-constructed plots featuring likeable and interesting characters, a la Uncharted, the video game will always find itself hampered by its need to let the audience participate in the journey and have the chance to win the game. Fidelity is a term used in theories surrounding the adaptation of texts, whether that be in the same medium or transcoded across a variety of media, a la Star Wars and the various slices of its multimedia pie.
Get me a big bowl. Pie, some ice cream on it. Good. Put some on your head.
This term describes how well an adaptation stays true to its source text. The reason why Fidelity can be so complicated is because of the inherent subjectivity involved in analysing how true an adaptation is to its source text. Adaptation theorist Robert Stamm somewhat begrudgingly notes that a viewer will feel that there is an essential, extractable essence inherent to what they are watching, which makes the text what it is. But that essence is malleable to the whims of an audience. Take a character like, say, Batman. A lot of people have very strong opinions on what the core of that character is, myself included. For example, myself and I'm sure a large number of others agree that Batman's refusal to kill people under any circumstances is sacrosanct to the character. Yet, Batman has been shown to kill various times in films, games, and even the comic books. This isn't Batman to me, but it could very well be to someone else, because Batman also means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Over the years, we've become exposed to vastly different takes on the character. And depending on how you were introduced to him, you might feel that the essential essence of Batman that must always stay the same is the pointy ears and nothing more. We could think of this essence as the one thing that a viewer will feel must stay a constant, even when a whole host of changes are made when a work is adapted. That's why we might feel angered or betrayed when we see Superman on screen being completely mishandled, or you might just keep telling yourself that it's really cool because it's complex or something.
Some audiences, most audiences, do not want a superhero film that is so complex.
But seriously, everyone has a version of a property they love that's the definitive version, and that's okay, but it means that when a creator comes to adapt a work, they will find their iteration of that text coming under scrutiny, because it might not feel true. LEGO Star Wars 2 The Original Trilogy can be looked at under both these critical lenses, as it is both an adaptation of an existing property and exists within the medium of the video game. In being an adaptation of the Star Wars series of films, it seeks to recreate the stories of those films. Even though we can define the narratives in these games as perhaps a parody of the original work, a slapstick, farce-infused iteration of what was originally intended, we are still shown many of the same beats and principles the filmic narrative presents, and with that we are supposed to feel the the same emotions before the ludic mechanic shatters the illusion of the story. Take the Han-Leia love story from LEGO Star Wars 2 The Original Trilogy, an arc adapted from the film Episode 5 The Empire Strikes Back. Here we see Han Solo win the affection of the princess, and the two become smitten with each other before finally proclaiming their love. This is the narrative the game is telling us in its simplest form.
However, within this game, the complete saga, and The Force Awakens,
it is easily possible to take control of Leia in a level, confront the AI-controlled Han Solo, and physically assault him until he falls apart into tiny Lego blocks, and vice versa. There is a clear dissonance between the story of the two as lovers and the ludus allowing the player free rein to murder each other ad infinitum.
with both these ideas in mind, let's look at a key scene from the original trilogy and examine 2 times it was adapted, once within the same medium and once within the medium of the video game. The moment Vader decides to turn on his master, Emperor Palpatine, saving his son Luke and renouncing his evil ways in the process, is perhaps the most important moment in Star Wars history. The build-up to this moment is great. We see Luke meet his father again, the pair having not been reunited since the Dark Lord revealed the truth about Luke's parentage on Bespin. Unless there's a comic or lunchbox detailing some time they met in between these 2 appearances, but it's probably either non-canon now or irrelevant in the first place. And a lot's changed for Luke in this time. He's become convinced that his father isn't beyond saving, and that the Jedi he once was is still there.
I feel the conflict within you. Let go of your hate.
It is too late for me.
No matter what Vader insists, Luke believes in his heart that his father is redeemable. When Vader delivers Luke to the Emperor, however, some form of doubt is cast in his mind, or at least the pressure to act. Palpatine twists the knife slowly but surely until... Having the 2 fight, reluctantly for Luke, but also in some ways for Vader as well, whilst the Emperor watches from the sideline as...
Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen.
is brilliant when it becomes clear that, in fact, Luke cannot be turned, as well as the fact that Vader clearly can't or won't kill him. The Emperor finally steps in. Vader's close-up here is the heart of the scene, perhaps even the movie. Most of us probably viewed this scene from such a young age that the outcome has become ingrained in our memory, but I'd imagine Vader's turn here is probably quite likely to a first-time viewer anyway. And yet, we don't know for certain. His silence fills the air with uncertainty, and as he looks back and forth between his dying son and the man that manipulated him into tearing his life apart, the choice becomes clear. So fast forward to the 2011 remaster of Return of the Jedi. This isn't an adaptation in the strictest sense, but clearly a case in which the original content was retooled and repackaged as a new work, thereby altering the original essence of the text to produce a different response in the viewer. Lucas's remastered cuts and special editions are infamous for degrading the integrity of the original work, with many fans often citing the changes to be not only superfluous, but a clear downgrade from what Lucas created. This 2011 remastered scene is no fucking different. I'm sure you'll easily be able to spot the key change here. What was once a powerful silence has been replaced by a very obvious take on the words. Unusual behind this was